Messages of condolence have been flooding into Princeton, New Jersey since early this morning, when the death of Albert Einstein was announced to the world. A scientific giant who sometimes generated political controversy as well as brilliant equations, Dr. Einstein died at the age of 76.
Einstein, brilliant physicist and theoretical mathematician, died at Princeton Hospital in the same seclusion which cloaked virtually all his activities in life. Einstein entered the hospital Friday, died this morning after refusing surgery, which it turned out would not have helped him recover from a ruptured artery. He became a U.S. citizen in 1940, but his speech was heavily flavored with the accent of his native Germany.
The idea of achieving security through national armament is, at the present state of military technique, a disastrous illusion. The hydrogen bomb appears on the public horizon as a probably attainable goal. Its accelerated development has been solemnly proclaimed by the President. If successful, radioactive poisoning of the atmosphere and hence annihilation of any life on Earth has been brought within the range of technical possibilities.
That was an exclusive statement which Professor Einstein made for the NBC cameras 5 years ago, in which he warned that the products of his genius, atomic bombs, were a menace to mankind. The professor often left the scientific world to speak on moral and political issues, especially those posed by atomic energy.
Is there any way out of this impasse created by man himself? All of us, and particularly those who are responsible for the attitude of the U.S. and the USSR, should realize that we may have vanquished an external enemy, but have been incapable of getting rid of the mentality created by war. It is impossible to achieve peace as long as every single action is taken with a possible future conflict in view.
This is the formula which summarized Einstein's theory of relativity, a theory which gained him a Nobel Prize. Einstein took mass, or the atomic weight of a substance, and the speed of light, which is constant, and expressed their relation to energy in a simple equation: E equals mc squared.
Another formula proposed by Dr. Einstein, with a twinkle in his eye, involves success in life. The rule, he would say, might be expressed as follows: success equals x plus y plus z. X being work, y being play, and z keeping your mouth shut.
Every child on earth is entitled to know. 1. That our sun is but one of many suns and stars, and that our earth orbits the sun in the gravitational field of the sun. 2. That our sun is one star in a galaxy of stars. 3. That the universe is infinite in extension as a geometric hierarchy of galaxies. And 4. That the universal law of gravitation extends infinitely far as 1 over r squared. That a fine and wonderful man named Albert Einstein understood the 1 over r squared gravitational field with majestic perfection, but that he did not understand the structure of the universe in the large and in the microscopic structure of elementary particles, including the photons of light with which we see with fine galaxy. Every child should know that the ability to see beyond Einstein results because we know today that the core of human consciousness develops from birth through 8 years old, and that our childhood realizations of the size and beauty of the universe determine the size and structure of reality for the rest of our lives. Every child should know not to cross into traffic and against the red light. Every child should know the Golden Rule and that the 10 Commandments of Moses is a sacred document that provides us with a moral compass with which to conduct our lives.
Published March 16, 2014. This is as grotesque as any civilization could imagine. In the film American Sniper, the sniper shoots the child. That's all I saw of the film, was the advertisement to go see it. He shoots the child. That's patriotism. Okay. Bye-bye.
What we have to do now is look at where we are today. Exactly. We're on the edge of the cliff, and we have got to start fixing it now. Otherwise, we're leaving a disaster to our children and grandchildren in the future. We could even lose our country if we don't get this fixed and straightened out. And now, nobody that's running really talks about it, about what we have to do and why we have to do it. They would prefer not to have it discussed.
Well, what's happening in this election, as you've seen, is that we're still coming out of a recession, and so both candidates, this president for 4 years, and both candidates in their campaign speeches are using the necessity to dig out from recession before they get to austerity. And you could argue that in Europe they've tried austerity before digging out from the recession, and that didn't do so much good in Europe. Do you need to?
Let me tell you in plain
you need to
Texas
hack the
talk.
recession first.
If I told you I don't want to dig out of my debt problem until I go broke, you'd say, what are you talking about, bro? And that's what you just said, but in very polished terms, recession. No, you're not going to pay your debt if you don't have the money. And if things are going downhill and you're running your debt up, you're making it next to impossible to pay your debt. And we've got to put the brakes on now and do this now and start and get it done. And it can be done if we in the House and Senate and the White House have the will. And certainly they should have the full support of the American people to get it done. And don't you think it's interesting that in all of these really tough times, we talked about all these big numbers, that the House, the Senate, and the White House don't reduce their salaries? Think about it.
You think they should?
Well, in a company, you'd have to, right? Sure you would. Everybody would. That never even comes up. No. I probably need to raise, right? But the point being, all the things they need to, if that's the condition of our country, and it is, then they need to set the first example of making the cutback for themselves.
Leading by example.
Exactly.
Is a fundamental principle, for, especially in business, which is where I spent most of my career, where you spent all your career. We need more of that.
How close do you think we are to a crisis? Both of you, I'll ask you first. People say that this deficit and debt issue will get resolved by politicians when they absolutely have to resolve it, not when they should resolve it. Do you think that we're close to a market crisis? To people, for instance, to bond buyers perhaps not investing in United States debt? Is that going to happen one of these years?
Of course.
How close are we?
I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know that, but just common sense tells you. We're not talking about politicians now. We're talking about people taking money out of their pocket.
Right.
At one time, that was considered the safest investment you could make, in a treasury bill or something, right? Mm-hmm. And now you've got every reason in the world to be concerned about will they be able to, is that going to last? How long will it last?
We're living in a dream world right now. I mean, most Americans don't understand. You used the word entitlement before. There is no such thing as entitlement. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court said that there's only two things that under the Constitution are guaranteed. Number one, military pensions. And number two, bondholders of U.S. debt. So the U.S. is not going to default on its sovereign debt. However, there's huge interest rate risk. And if you're a foreign investor, there's huge currency risk in investing in it. Now look what's happening right now. All the new debt in the last 2 years, it's been purchased by the Federal Reserve, has purchased about 70% of it. We're self-dealing in our own debt. We don't have market rates right now. We have artificially low rates because we're self-dealing in our own debt. China, Japan, OPEC nations, because they have positive trade balances and they got to do something with their money. But are they buying 30-year bonds? Heck no, because of the interest rate and the currency risk. They're buying short-term, which means we have historically low interest rates. We have the lowest average maturity in history, which means we haven't locked in these rates. And when interest rates go up, and they will, for every 1% increase in interest rates, it's $160 billion a year in new spending for which we get, as we say in the South, shinola, nothing. And right now we're 4 to 5% below, average interest rates, $640 to $800 billion a year for nothing.
So, but it is interesting that not more people talk about it on television, and certainly the candidates don't spend much time talking about this, and it's just like being in denial.
Well, we didn't go through the decade George W. Bush and the last 4 years Barack Obama's decade, but what they've had to deal with, in fairness, right, is 9/11, couple of wars that require a lot of U.S. spending.
Right.
The tax cuts of George W. Bush, I'm not sure where you stood on those, but they did eat into our amount of money that we had to spend. And then the recession, which was, some say, close to a depression. Didn't that time period prevent us, all those things happening, prevent us from being able to make deficits and debt a top priority?
I don't know. It shouldn't have. It could have, but it shouldn't have if people were thinking clearly, if they were well educated, if they even understood this whole debt thing, which they don't.
Right.
If you say, what percent of the American people really understand all of this? I'd say it's a very low number. And now it should be everybody. And everybody should say, because this is my country. I mean, we can't do this. We've got to do this, this, and this. And people should be very active about not letting anything damage our country. Now, the one thing we have not mentioned at all, there is no question at all in my mind, if we keep going this way, some nation is going to head over here to take us. And boy, if they do, they pick the right time, right? Now, I wish every American would think about that all day, every day, and say, we can't let that happen. We've had the greatest country in the world. We've got to get it back there, and we've got to keep it there and make it better every year, not worse every year. That should be our goal. Every year we should look back and say, boy, things have really gotten a lot better. And even after they're ideal, you want to still make it better. Not just settle with what you have or not let it fly apart so you pay off all the people that helped you in your campaign.
he does tell us an important feature about what the role of this kind of an institution is. And it's, in a way, it's the genius of the National Science Foundation to think about, well, how can we break out of the constraints that were imposed on us these days by, at the same time, there's a large amount of stuff that we really need to do, but financial constraints, job constraints, the fact that our field is not expanding exponentially the way it was when we entered it. And what mechanisms can we invent that will in fact enable especially young people to explore the boundaries, to work on the hard problems, to do things that are not just part of the mainstream. The forces that are acting on us, of course, are making us more and more all focus on a very small number of problems, because if you work on the same problem that lots of other people are working on, they'll understand what they're doing, what you're doing, they'll give you jobs, they'll fund your research grants. And if you try to work on something that not many other people are doing, or that people who are coming from a different culture are doing, you're in trouble. And so how do you counter that? The NSF has done that rather better. I wouldn't say perfectly, Mike, but than any other institutions in our government at the moment. And the genius of the idea was to establish an institute like this one, where you could afford to take risks, where the risk-taking was in the hands of the locals, not in the hands of the bureaucrats or even the study committees in Washington, where you could bring adequate numbers of people together to think about issues, problems that where even at isolated universities like Harvard and Princeton, you weren't going to have the kinds of critical size groups. So that's a very important thing, and I think we have to work to preserve that, to understand why it's valuable. Let me take 60 more seconds, because I want to pick up then on this theme of what's honest, and also Walter's theme of some social responsibility. What we're seeing happen, part of this explosion of our field, is that we're reaching out to lots of different areas. It's not just biology that's enormously important, but we're reaching back. I play around with engineering. Some of us are going out to ecology. Others are going out to other kinds of complex systems that seem to fit within the logical framework and the tools that we physicists have developed. Even to the extent that many of the issues that we need to tackle in those areas are of great political consequence. I think of trying to understand the science of climate change, trying to understand the impacts
best way to explain what we physicists mean when describing music is to reflect back on Einstein's relentless 30-year search for so-called uniform
the risks of earthquakes and stuff like that. And many of these issues bear on public policy. And we almost are by force required to think about those things. And the important thing, the last sentence that I want to mention is that we ought to do that if only for the reason that there is a culture in science, it's not just theoretical physics, of integrity, which means honesty, that we can maintain our reputation for looking at those problems objectively and giving the best possible answers. And we can also, very, very important these days, maintain our tradition of a sort of a community which means freedom of exchange of information, which means respect for other people's points of view, which is ingrained in us, but not so much in the rest of society. And therefore, I would just like to second Walter's ideas that I think that part of what we're doing, we have to be at least conscious of those broader responsibilities. Thanks.
It's the turn of the penultimate director of the K.I.T.P.
More than the ultimate one.
Yes. Jim Hartle. Jim?
Thanks. I'm the only one of the original gang of four who's speaking at this session. Ray Sawyer, Rex Calipino, Bob Sugar, and myself, that started the Institute, so it's maybe appropriate that I say something about the very beginning. The idea, I think it's fair to say, came from Boris Kaiser, but in the roundabout way that the NSF works, he had to get somebody to propose it. He dropped various hints, and we responded enthusiastically. There was a call for proposals, a famous shootout in Washington, D.C. I'm going to leave it to other people to tell the story about Blackie's power. And eventually we got a message from Boris saying, your proposal would be a leading proposal, if not the leading proposal, if the proposed action on page 48 were implemented. So I called Boris up and I said, Boris, what does this mean? He said, what it means is your proposal would be a leading proposal, if not the leading proposal, if the items on page 48 were. Careful study of page 48 revealed that it had to do with the director, and we understood that we were to find a director first. That led to a commitment by Walter Cohn, and we eventually were successfully reading page 48. We were awarded the proposal. It was Walter who largely shaped the Institute, but he was aided by many people, ourselves, the advisory board, and I'd like to mention in this connection especially Paul Martin, whose wisdom and energy at the early stages were crucial. We were fortunate in our first permanent member, Frank Wilczek, a decision which seems all the more prescient in view of this week's events. Our biggest worry, amazingly enough, was, would anybody come? To put this in context, you have to remember that at the time, the idea of an institute with the programs focusing on one coherent topic was a novelty. There were no comparable institutions in the U.S., and indeed the conception was opposed vigorously, in fact, by people who believed that it was the wrong model for research because it was doing research outside of universities. I remember one of my colleagues at the University of Chicago who said at the time of one of our reviews, if we don't stop it now, it's going to go on forever. He was right. Why did we succeed? Well, we were fortunate, as I mentioned, fortunate in the support of the university, fortunate in attracting distinguished first director, and attracting a cadre of permanent members in our advisory boards. But our fortune was not just mere luck. I think it had a deeper explanation. The cross-disciplinary institute, visiting scientists, was an idea whose time was right. It was a time when physics was becoming increasingly connected across the traditional disciplinary lines. Particle physics and cosmology, field theory and condensed matter physics, nuclear physics and the strong interactions, biology and physics, astrophysics and general relativity. It was a time when communication patterns were changing in the subject, and which interaction across much larger domains of space and time were possible. So, in short, I think the K.I.T.P was successful precisely because it was ahead of the curve and alert to changes in the way that physics was done. We were supported because there were many other people who appreciated these changes, and they formed, in the language of current politics, our base. They supported us, became our permanent members, became the directors, and participated in the Institute. It was, if you like, a lightning rod for potential that was already built up. Now, George Santayana said once famously that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Nowhere does this seem to me to be less true, right, than in science. Examination of history does reveal certain human patterns. For example, the pattern of prevailing wisdom that's upset by new ideas, that results in slowly in a new paradigm that itself becomes conventional wisdom, and so on. But at the level of ideas, science crosses ever new frontiers, which are not the past. We are not going around in circles, as Santayana suggested we might. Characteristically, theoretical physicists always know which direction they're moving, even if they don't know quite where they are going to wind up. consensus. So, how does the K.I.T.P fit into this picture? We are fortunate, I think, not to be based in the past. It's not so relevant. We embody no school of thought, no one direction. Rather, we rely on the guidance of the instant, as represented in the advice of the entire community of physicists, chiefly through our advisory board. And so, for that reason, I think the challenge for us is to see whether we're still ahead of the curve in the future. But because we're not based in the past, I think it will be very possible. Now, David's given us an injunction not to say anything about the future, and therefore I won't make any predictions, especially because, as Boris said, it's difficult. But I will offer a hope. And that is, when we come to our 50th anniversary, I hope that scientists will be able to say that the K.I.T.P. was always at the boundaries, but remarkably also at the center. Thank you very much.
this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure that they too join with Americans in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world.
Ladies and gentlemen, Roger Whittaker.
There's a ship lies rigged and ready in the harbor. Tomorrow for old England she sails, far away from your land of endless sunshine, to my land full of rainy skies and gales. And I shall be aboard that ship tomorrow, though my heart is full of